Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Oklahoma City. Just a few opening remarks from me, and then happy to take any questions. Just to put some context around these finals, Herb Simon, the owner of the Indiana Pacers, is the longest-standing owner in the NBA. He bought the team with his brother Mel in 1983, at a time when the NBA Finals were still on tape delay in the East Coast, and were on at 11:30 in New York, where I grew up. At that point in the league's history, when Herb Simon bought the team, the Celtics and Lakers had won 60% of the finals to that point in league history. Roughly 2 decades later, Clay Bennett bought this team. And in that year, in 2006, there was major technological changes happening in the world. It was the year that Twitter launched, that Google bought YouTube, that Facebook first extended beyond universities to the general public, and it was just about a year before Apple launched its first iPhone. I've been thinking about those dates because it was really, in 2006 and then going forward, that enabled the NBA, which had been on a path to going global, to become essentially supercharged in the way that through smartphones, social media, the internet, that our games could truly become accessible to anywhere. Jump ahead 2 more decades to today. As you all know, roughly 30% of our players are born outside the United States. Our games are essentially available to anyone in the world who has access to the internet or Wi-Fi or a smartphone, for that matter. And the last 7 MVPs were born outside the United States, Shea being the latest. Also, just on the point of small markets, Mayor Holt here in Oklahoma City, I thought, said it best. Of the 19,502 cities, towns, and villages in the United States, Oklahoma City is larger than 19,482 of them. Said differently, about 300 million Americans live in cities smaller than Oklahoma City and Indianapolis, which is a bit larger. And that means that 88% of Americans live somewhere smaller than these cities. And lastly, say, even more importantly, as a global sport, you can feel the passion for this team and for NBA basketball here in Oklahoma City, but that's a passion felt globally. So, Tim, having said that, happy to answer any questions.
We'll start in the third row on the far right. Tim?
Tim Reynolds with the AP. Good to see you.
You too. Thank you.
To continue the trend, I think we asked you this in Denver 2 years ago, in Boston last year, and now here. It's 7 different champions in 7 years, no matter who wins. David handed trophies to 8 different franchises in his 30 years. You're about to hand a trophy to your 9th different franchise in 12 years. Did you ever envision that this run would continue for as long as it has? And how good or not or indifferent is it for the league that there is this diversity of champion every year?
First of all, I was talking about those statistics when Herb Simon, of course, bought his team, and you had 60% of championships have been won by 2 teams. And then for now, jump ahead, another 15 years or so, and by this, or a little longer, 65 years into the league, 3 teams had won 60% of the championships. And I remember when I first joined the league, David used to joke David Stern, early on in his tenure as commissioner, he said his job was to go back and forth between Boston and LA handing out championship trophies. So to your point, I think it was very intentional. It didn't begin with me. It began with David, of course, in successive collective bargaining agreements, where we set out to create a system that allowed for more competition around the league, with the goal being to have 30 teams all in a position, if well managed, to compete for championships. And that's what we're seeing here. And I've said before, the goal is that market size essentially becomes irrelevant. And I'd say it's the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about technology earlier. In part, it's the successive collective bargaining agreements, and what and thank you to the players, because I think they recognized we all had an interest in serving the fans, and that fans in every city want to see their team be competitive. But in addition, these technological changes have changed the meaning of the differential from one city to another. I mean, this is, I don't know, roughly 700,000 people in Oklahoma City, I think around 900,000 in Indianapolis. So not such small markets, as Mayor Holt pointed out, but even if there were another million people or so in a city, when you're talking to a global market in a sport like the NBA, where we're being followed by billions of people around the world, those incremental changes become pretty meaningless. So, I'd say back to your question, I can't say standing here I envision that we'd have, 7 different champions over 7 years. I'd only say the goal isn't necessarily to have a different champion every year. It's to have, as we've said before, parity of opportunity. And, hats off to Oklahoma City and Indianapolis, two incredibly well-run franchises, top to bottom, that deserve to be here. So if whichever team were to win, if they were to repeat, I wouldn't then be saying this therefore isn't working because I didn't go to a different city to hand out the trophy. I'd be saying that's the system we wanted to create. As long as there's a level playing field, again, it's where we're focused on is the process that goes into building the team, not the outcome. And so the outcomes will be whatever they are. Thanks, Tim.
Adam, right in front of me, Joe.
Joe Varden, The Athletic. Nice to see you.
Hey, Joe.
We see you several times a year, and it almost always comes up about expansion. What is the current temperature among the Board of Governors to expand the NBA? And, whether it's Seattle or another American city, just what have you guys found in your committees so far?
Yeah, sure. So, Joe, let me answer expansion two ways. One, of course, are expansion of current, NBA teams. And there, I'd say the current sense is we should be exploring it. I don't think it's automatic because it depends on your perspective on the future of the league. As I've said before, expansion in a way is selling equity in the league. And if you believe in the league, you don't necessarily want to add partners. On the other hand, that we recognize there are underserved markets in the United States and elsewhere. And I think markets that deserve to have NBA teams, probably even if we were to expand, more than we can serve. But we have a owners meeting in July in Las Vegas, and will be on the agenda to take the temperature of the room. We have committees that are already talking about it. But my sense is at that meeting, they're going to give direction to me and my colleagues at the league office that we should continue to explore it. Just the second part of my question, what also comes to mind in terms of expansion is the opportunity potentially to create other competition around the world. I think, as you know, 5 years ago or so, we created a league, in essence, a competition of existing clubs in Africa. And so Mark Tatum is here, Deputy Commissioner, Chief Operating Officer. He's hard at work on that, along with several of my colleagues. And we have been discussing potentially creating a league in Europe. And I view that as a form of expansion as well. And I'd say, again, just as I'm saying in some American cities, we think there's an opportunity to serve fans in Europe who are, no knock on European basketball, because most of those international MVPs I just talked about are coming from Europe. So there's really high-level basketball being played there, but we think there is an opportunity to better serve fans there. So I view that as a form of expansion as well, and that's something we're also thinking hard about.
Fourth row in the middle, Tanya, if you can raise your hand so Adam sees you. Thank you.
Hey, Adam. Tanya Ganguly, New York Times. This is a finals with obviously two great teams, maybe historically so, but it's not one with a ton of star power. I'm curious what you think the league can do to raise the profile of some of these great players in smaller markets, and also if you think that's the responsibility of the league.
Well, one, I'm not sure I completely buy into the premise to your question. I mean, I think Shea is an enormous star, Tyrese is a huge star, Pascal. I get it, in fairness, not at the level of some other stars that we've had in this league, and maybe not as prominent as some players currently still playing in the league. I would only say that those players, say LeBron and Steph, or Kevin Durant, who are better known nationally and globally than some of these players, they are in those positions because of their success on the floor. I think, much less about the size of the market they happen to play in. So it's my expectation that, I mean, first of all, whoever comes out of this championship series will rise to the next level almost automatically. But then I think over time, you know, those stars are made on the floor, not by the league office. But having said that, is there more we can do? Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about it at the league in terms of what's the best way to promote players going forward. We have enormous presence on social media. We have our new network partners coming in next year who have huge marketing arms, NBC, Peacock, Amazon, of course, ESPN, ABC, Disney. So I think collectively there is more we can do. And there's a lot more competition than there used to be, too. It's harder to break through. I mean, there are more resources, more access through social media and other platforms, part of those technological changes I referred to before. But there's also a lot more noise out there, and people have so many other entertainment options, unlimited numbers of channels, YouTube, et cetera, other things they can be doing. So I think we have to up our game as well at the league office to market those players.
Right next to Tanya, we got Vinny.
Hey, Adam. Vince Goodwill, Yahoo Sports.
Hey, Vince.
Through these playoffs, Jason Tatum, debilitating injury, Stephen Curry, a series-changing injury, there's been discussion or talk about the compressed nature of the playoff schedule because of the elongated schedule of the regular season, that this is an unintended consequence. Is that something that the league office looks at when you see injuries to star players in that nature? Is this just nothing you can do about that because of how you conduct the regular season?
Well, I'm not sure it's a function of the regular season. I mean, there's a certain cadence to the playoffs. If anything, there's more spacing in the playoff games than when you and I grew up in the NBA. We used to frequently, you know, play playoff games back to back on the weekends. So, having said that, we of course look at it very closely. We have a competition. Byron Sporello's here. We have a competition committee coming up next week, and then another one in July in Las Vegas. And part of what we do is look at every form of data we can get our hands on. And that includes minutes played, it includes injuries, it includes whatever impact we see that you know, back-to-backs are having on players, not just measured by injuries, but in production on the floor. And so we're going to continue to look at it. I don't think there's any magic bullets here. I mean, in fact, injuries are considerably down this playoffs, you know, from what it's been historically. I think it's our second lowest in 10 years. So, you know, and we have pretty healthy teams coming into the finals now. And so we look at it very closely. You know, this question comes up a lot. And I think I don't want to make a change just to make a change. You know, people are asked, should we shorten the season? Should we, you know, spread the games out over a longer period of time? I don't necessarily think we should reduce the number of games. If we had more days to work with, there's no question that if players are better rested, putting aside injuries, that, you know, that potentially leads to a little bit heightened competition, and I think a little bit what you see in the playoffs too, because they're better rested. But we're up against also players needing to take time off and needing to have an off season. So we will continue to look at it.
Fifth row on the right, Jeff, if you can raise your hands. Madam C, thank you.
Hey, Jeff.
Hello, Adam. In regards to the All-Star game, will next year's All-Star game be U.S. players versus the world? And then the second part of that, I know it's not your job to throw your hands up in the air and give up, but given the nature of all-star games across all sports, the modern athlete, is there any part of you that considers that, you know, the all-star game is what it is and it's not going to return to what it used to be?
Well, on the second part of your question, I mean, nothing ever is what it used to be, but I think to your point, it's my job not to give up, but also to innovate and to look for new approaches. You know, and I've talked before. I follow all the other sports. I think what the NHL did with the four-nation face-off, I thought was very effective. There's a long history of international competition in the NBA and in global basketball. I mean, we had a spectacular Olympics last summer, you know, with huge ratings and enormous amount of interest. But I also recognize that there are some forces working against us, and that largely is often players needing a rest during the season, maybe teams not encouraging their players to play the hardest for what's viewed as an exhibition game. So your first part of your question, we are looking at something that brings an international flavor into all-star competition. I think, as I said the other day, we're still experimenting internally with different formats and talking to the Players Association about that. I don't think a straight-up USA versus world makes sense, but of course that's not what they did in the NHL either. I think, there'll probably be some different teams we form, but, whether it's some regional basis for how we combine certain groups of players, because USA players, well, I talked about earlier, the international is 30% of the league. American players are still 70% of the league. So I think we can play off that nationalism. We are moving to NBC next year for the All-Star Game, where we used to be many years ago. We will be smack in the middle of Winter Olympic competition on NBC, so we will be our games, our All-Star Game, which will be in the afternoon instead of the evening next year, will be coming right out of Olympic competition. We'll be going back to Winter Olympic competition after the game. So I think the players will get into the mood. I mean, we've had positive conversations. I know I've been up here before saying I think I have a fix, and I haven't been successful so far. But I think we're onto something, and I think there's a real opportunity to create enhanced interest and enhanced competition from the players.
Back of the room on the right, Tim.
Tim Bonds from ESPN, back here. Hello.
Hey, Tim.
To go follow up on Joe's question earlier, obviously expansion has been a topic that has been discussed for a while, as you mentioned. I know you said it's going to be an official topic next month. When you say that you expect the recommendation to be to explore it further, do you think there will be a formalized process of really actively engaging in what that would look like? Is that what you expect that to be, or is it something different?
Yeah, Tim, what I expect is if a decision is made that there should be further exploration by the league office and presumably a committee of team owners, it would be more of a formal process. I think there's been no lack of interest. Certainly, I've gotten a lot of unsolicited calls, and I essentially have said to people, from several different cities, we're just not engaging in that process right now, and I want to be fair to everyone, so I don't want to have meetings with some and not others. But I think if we were to say, yes, we're now going to move into some more formal exploratory phase, we would take those meetings, and in addition, likely we would engage with outside advisors who would look at markets, look at economic opportunities and media opportunities, et cetera. I'll just add, and I've said this before, one of the factors in terms of potential expansion is local media. And we do need to figure out something there. I mean, for the league, we have several of our team regional networks have actually shut down. Others have recently come out of bankruptcy. Others seem to be teetering. I mean, it's just we're going through a transition in media. By the way, it's not for lack of interest in local media rights. In fact, I personally think it's the best value in all of sports right now, because it's where we have the most engagement is a team in its market. There's nothing close to it than the national interest in a team. I think there's been disruption because there's been a dramatic decline in traditional television, and the streaming services, which have viewed themselves as national or global, haven't really localized in a way yet to do team-specific deals. But I think we're going to see that, and as I said, we will be fine, because I have no doubt in terms of the value of that content.
Second row in the middle, Rachel.
Hey, Rachel.
Adam, you were saying that, if you could expand the year, you could get more days between games. Is the problem with shortening the regular season schedule just financial? If financial is such a big part of it, you guys do so many creative things. Could you take some of the expansion city money if you guys have some come in to dull that blow? Are there other ways that you guys are looking at that could shorten the season but take into the financial obstacle or hurdle into account?
Yeah, Rachel, money's part of it. There's no question about it. We're a business. But having said that, I don't really see the benefit to reducing the number of games. People used to say you should reduce the number of games because it will lead to a reduction in the number of injuries. We have absolutely no data to suggest that. And in fact, there aren't more injuries. If that were the case, you'd think you'd have more injuries in April than you do in October. We don't say that. Or you'd think you'd see more injuries per game in the playoffs than you do in the regular season. And we don't see that either. And another way of looking at the length of the season, if you think in terms of serving the fans, it's more opportunities for fans to go to games and to watch games. And yes, there would be an economic reduction if we reduce the number of games. So that's a factor. But I don't see an overall benefit, and I don't think keeping the start and end of the season at the same points, reducing the number of games and adding some rest is enough of a reason, I would just say it that way, to start reducing the number of games. I mean, we'll continue to look at it. I mean, I would rather than, start earlier maybe or push a little bit later. And maybe just the last thing I'll say on that, I mean, the whole way media works and television works has changed so dramatically. I've just by way of example, I mean, all of us of a certain age know that it used to be the case that new programs launched in the fall and there were never new programs in the summer. Nobody thinks that way anymore. Like, new programs are launching all the time on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Peacock or whatever service you use, and we don't think that way. And also, frankly, ratings have changed from what they used to be. I mean, Netflix is the most valuable, pure play media company out there, and nobody in this room knows what their ratings are. We don't even think in terms of ratings. We think maybe in terms of popularity and buzz around a program. So, we're going through a transition, and we're going to work through that.
Right next to Rachel, Ramona.
Hi, Ramona.
Ramona Shelburne, ESPN. We just got done with the Minnesota Timberwolves sale closing. That was a sort of a protracted thing that ended up in the courts and a little messy. I think you've said before you don't advocate for sort of stage deals anymore, but what lessons can you learn from how that played out to maybe how the Boston Celtics sale coming up might go through?
Well, I just say that the Boston Celtics deal I don't think of as a stage deal. They're still in the process of completing it. It's really more about a phase out of current ownership. And I think Bill Chisholm, who's the incoming owner, he's got to sort of straighten out some affairs in his life and his business. He's currently located on the West Coast. And I think he's a huge admirer of Wyc Grousbeck and the way he's been running that team. Obviously, the results speak for themselves. So I think what he's working out with Wyc is an opportunity for him, as I said, to learn the business from Wyc and then step in as the principal owner, as the governor of the team. There would then be no switching going forward. I think in the situation in Minnesota, yes, as I said before, I mean, it's not ideal to have those kinds of staged transactions, but also you learn, like, it's nice to state these principles, but there we were in the middle of a pandemic, and Glenn Taylor was in the process of selling his team, and we all agreed to something that seemed to make sense in the moment.
Third row on your left on the end here, Mark.
Mark Spears, ESPN's Anscape.
Hey, Mark. Hey.
I know you and Mark Tatum have been extensively following just the path and the growth from Africa. When you look at Siakam's stories, want to see your thoughts on his story, how obscure it is for him to have made it to the NBA from a story, and if you believe the road is much easier, and not easier, but much better now than it was during his arrival.
Well, just back to Pascal Siakam, just as a reminder, everybody in the room, he was the 27th pick in the draft, and he obviously was just the MVP of our conference finals. So there's an enormous amount of talent out there in the world, and maybe it makes the point, too, that, well, it's a lot harder to find a so-called diamond in the rough, and I wouldn't call diamond in the rough the 27th pick in the first round of the NBA draft. But one thing we're seeing in Africa, and Mark Tatum can attest to this, he's been spending a lot of time there, I've spent a fair amount of time in Africa, that there is so much talent. And I think one of the things we have to decide as a league and working with FIBA, our federation, is how much we should be investing in helping develop that talent, especially at an elite level. We have academies in Africa, but also just put it in terms of the magnitude that, I recently read this statistic that in 5 years from now, not 25 years from now, but 5 years from now, it's projected that over 40% of the youth of the world will live in Africa. And so, to the extent that we're a growing sport, and we're not the number one sport in Africa, it's likely soccer, but we're pretty much the number two, maybe rugby in some markets, but certainly the fastest growing sport, that as we look out to the future, not just in terms of where our players are going to come from, but also Africa as a market. I mean, it's, roughly 55 countries, larger than China collectively in terms of population, a faster growing population. I think 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. We're really focused on that continent. Now, I think, it's not my money I'm investing. I work here, but I think it's a discussion we continue to have with team governors of taking, a longer term view. Not, as I said, that statistic I mentioned was 5 years, not 25 years, but I think as we look out and Mark looks out over the next 10 years, what is that opportunity to continue to develop the sport in Africa? And I think it's enormous. And just back to my first point about technology, you know, you have this huge install base now of smartphones throughout Africa, and people's ability to watch these games wherever they are without, you know, a conventional sort of cable, traditional, you know, broadcast system. So I'm very optimistic about the continent and our ability to continue to grow the game there.
First row on your right, 3 in. Michael?
Michael Grange, Sportsnet Toronto. How you doing, Adam?
Hey, good, Michael.
Yeah, you were talking on off the top about the progress towards equality of opportunity from a business standpoint with these teams. As the CBA has got, you know, kind of pursued a more flatter type of profile, was there any thought or could there be any thought about the advantages that lower tax regions have as it relates to a more restrictive salary cap picture?
I'd only say that issue comes up a lot, and we talk about it in bargaining. And I think, in essence, the question goes to advantages and disadvantages of certain states and for certain markets. And I think, well, you know, somebody might say, well, this city is more attractive for these following reasons, but also has a, you know, higher taxes, you know, and there's climate differential and, you know, and size of market. And I think ultimately, what we've learned is that, well, I think that's a factor for players making decisions. It's not risen to the level, and just take your specific question in terms of taxation, that we have a sense that players are not going to certain markets because the tax rate is higher there as opposed to somewhere else. And I think ultimately, you know, part of the balance in the system is player becomes a free agent and has the right to make that decision where they want to be. We just want to make sure every team's in a position to compete for that player's talent. But at least it just gets too complex. I mean, in short, to start factoring all those different differentials from city to city.
All right, we'll take one last one in the third row there. Randall, raise your hand, please. Thank you.
Hey, Adam. Quick question on media. In your opening remarks, you're talking about market size and ratings. And normally, after signing a $76 billion media deal, you don't see commissioners or sports executives in general after what many would assume to be a successful media negotiation. 2 new partners, a streamer, another one with a streamer with Peacock, of course. What do you make of the conversation around the business of your game and not necessarily the game itself?
It's a great question. I think about it a lot. I mean, on one hand, I'm looking at Mike Bass, the head of communications. I like the fact that people are talking about us. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It seems a little unusual how much discussion there is around ratings in this league. Again, as I said, I'm a fan of all sports, and I follow lots of media, and it seems like there's a lot more chatter. And even for me, it's just sort of just walking on the street and fans coming up to me that often, and it frustrates me, that the first thing they say is, how are the ratings, or what are the ratings going to be, as opposed to, wow, you just had them, you know, 2 incredible, you know, conference finals. What a great playoff series you've had. So I can't quite put my finger on it. I think, you know, Joe Dumars, who just left the league office, said to me, you know, we were talking about one day in the office, he said, it's just a thing about the NBA. It's just like, it's part of the culture of the NBA that we're self-critical, that sort of our fans, it's part of the culture, you know, around the league to be looking at what's bad as opposed to what's good. I think it seeps into our coverage, quite honestly. Sometimes, I think to the earlier question, I mean, maybe on the league office sometimes to maybe find better ways that we can be marketing our sport. But I've come to accept it. I think ultimately, you know, and by the way, I should add, maybe it comes from a time when earlier in the history of this league, the competition was dominated by a few teams. And so then it becomes more of the part of the conversation that somehow it must be a bad thing for the league if one of those teams isn't competing. Obviously, just to be, you know, very clear and intentional, I love what's happening in the league right now. You know, I've been an advocate for these changes. I think it's great that we have 2 so-called small markets competing, but I'm not even sure it's fair to describe them that way. I think we want a league ultimately where if you are a fan of the game of basketball, by definition, you're going to want to tune into the finals because these are the best basketball is being played. These are the 2 teams that have fought through, you know, a difficult and competitive and long regular season, fought through, you know, gotten to essentially the 4th round, which is the finals, and here they are. And so I don't want to complain too much about it because I'd rather people be talking about us than not talking about us, but I think it's just part of the culture of this league.
Okay, Adam, a final thought from you?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. One thing I just wanted to say at the end, and that briefly share my appreciation and gratitude to Turner Sports. They were our partners for 41 years. I was with the league for 33 of those 41 years. Their coverage has been fantastic, and it's not just the on-air talent, but I want to share my appreciation and thanks with the literally hundreds, probably over the 41 years, thousands of people who've worked on NBA production, and wish them well and just make sure we acknowledge them. Since this past weekend, they went off the air. So with that, everyone, thank you for being here and enjoy the game tonight. Thank you, Tim.